Hey, workplace besties. So it has been a long time, as you can see from the title. Yes, we are going to talk about this Diddy situation, but we're going to talk about it from the lens of what happens at work and ask ourselves the questions: what happens when fear, power, and corruption collide to create a toxic work environment? Let's get into it. LinkedIn success. I am not feeling well, but I'm trying to be more consistent. So I'm bringing you this video, and this is like less scripted. This is just more thoughts off the top of my head. When I started recording this, I was not feeling well. I got hit with a super cold. So for those of you out there, there is something going around. So make sure you're taking your elderberry root, your echinacea, doing all your things. I hope you have PTO, and I hope you get to take advantage of some sick time. And if you're new here, welcome. If you're returning, welcome back. On this channel, we talk about all kinds of stuff, but mostly we talk about what happens in the world of work, from corruption, scandal, the dark sides of corporate America. For those of you that may not know, and you know I'm always looking at my notes here, Diddy is facing incredibly serious charges right now. He's in court facing some very serious allegations, some of which are ex trafficking charges, kidnapping, forced labor, arson. So, this whole RICO case situation is happening. And he's fighting for his freedom right now. But this video is not about the deep, gory details of the trial. It's about really the conversation, and what prompted me to record this is I keep hearing, at least on the interwebs, and I've actually had some people that I know that are asking the question, well, why didn't Cassie try to leave? And I think that is the wrong question. And I also think it's a dangerous question, because that type of mindset that creates the environment, types of environments that we hate, right? So if we're questioning Cassie, how motivated are we in our personal lives to speak out about wrongdoings that we see? Because it doesn't just happen in Hollywood. Even in regular companies with jobs like yours and mine, with HR and with protections that we have as workers, these kinds of things, maybe not as extreme. You know, you may not have a boss that's threatening to blow up your car, but it happens every single day. Abuse at the job. And so it happens in retail jobs, it happens at a bank, it happens at a post office, it happens if you're a cashier at a restaurant, right? It happens in a cubicle. Like, it doesn't matter what kind of job it is, as long as there is power and a power imbalance, then that means that there's a risk of abuse and silence. So the other thing I think about too, and I've seen this said on the internet in various ways, but you know, when you're asking the question, why didn't Cassie leave? Keep in mind, she started off as an employee. Let's look at it just from the employee angle. So she started off as an employee. Diddy had a company. And let's be real, you know, I started off at the top of this video talking about how I was sick and not feeling well, right? Because I had a cold. But how many of you are afraid to ask your boss for PTO? Or how many of you are terrified to admit that, like, hey, I need a mental health break and I need to take some time off work? How many of y'all are afraid, like trembling, to tell your boss you made a mistake on a spreadsheet or that cash register is short? Okay. So we can't act like we don't understand what it's like to stay in a job that you may not be happy with, but you're staying for multiple reasons. So if you're asking that question, you can probably answer it yourself too, because the bottom line is everyone has to work to live, right? And so having not the fear of not having a paycheck is a big reason why people don't leave jobs that they hate, jobs that they are being abused at. Some of you right now have leaders that you know shouldn't be leaders, that are treating people badly. It's a hostile work environment, but you're still there. But if you imagine a job where you're getting paid more than you probably ever have in your life, you're getting treated to all of these things, it might be difficult to say, okay, I'm going to go ahead and walk away from this. And then on top of that, if your employer is dangerous, like if you think about it, especially like in the recruiting world, I see this all the time. There's something called the backdoor reference check. Now, this has happened at other companies I've worked at previously, and in my past. The backdoor reference check is when you are applying for a job and everything is going great. And then, as you get older, the world of work gets smaller and smaller. And so somebody might say, hey, uh, I see Brandon applied, and I know Brandon. I used to work with him. Oh, tell me more about that experience. How was that? Man, Brandon was horrible. I hated working with him. And then guess what? Somehow Brandon doesn't get the job. Now he was moving forward in the interview process, things were going good. So I use that example to say that in corporate America, those biases exist. And so imagine with Diddy, a mogul, that person can quite literally say, you will never work in this town again. I mean, it happens in corporate, it can happen in various industries. And for sure, it was going to happen to her, right? If she was going to say anything. I mean, and then when we talk about like, oh, why didn't she speak up? Why didn't she leave? That irritates me so badly because some of you won't even tell your nail tech that you don't like the way your nails came out, right? But we're expecting a 19-year-old, we're expecting her to be able to stand up to this very dangerous man. And here's the thing about that too is that there's a very specific reason why people don't say anything when they are at the nail salon and something happens, or they're getting their hair done and they don't like it, so they just decide like, I'm just never going to come back, but I'm not going to confront the issue. Or they don't say something to their boss when their boss is clearly toxic. So if you look at the Diddy case, he had employees that helped him carry out his chaos. And why would they do that? It's because of his perceived level of authority. And we see it all the time. Um, have you ever heard of the Milgram experiment? If you get a chance, look that up. It's pretty fascinating. I'll put something on the screen, but basically, it was an experiment where people were required to, I think, electrocute people, regular everyday people, and turn up the notch on the pain levels, right? And they did it because the people that were asking them to do it, they thought were in positions of power. And so we see this all the time. There's something in our psyche that makes us submit to power structures, right? And that could be because, again, especially with your job holds your paycheck and your livelihood in their hands. And so that is a lot of times what makes people submit when it comes to work. But there was another situation where it was like the strip search phone call scam. There were a series of incidents across the United States. I'll add a link so that you can read that story further. But basically, somebody called and asked these, they sounded like they had authority, right? So they were able to call, sound like they were in positions of power, and convince the store managers of these fast food restaurants to strip search their employees. Is that something happens in the psyche when it comes to authority and fear and submitting. So at work, it's the threat of being fired, it's the threat of losing that paycheck that makes people say, okay, you know what, this isn't right, but I'm going to go along with it. Leads into the second thing that feeds into a toxic work environment is fear. So in Diddy's case, we're talking about blowing up cars and other types of threats, beatings. But in everyday jobs, that fear could sound more like, I can't afford to lose this job. I've got bills to pay. What if nobody believes me? If the environment is toxic enough and it's supported by leadership, sometimes people will gang up on the person that decides to speak out. Remember, we had a whole video about whistleblowers. If you look at some of the whistleblower cases, and I'm going to actually create some videos about that, but there are 3 people from Boeing that were whistleblowers and they just happened to end up dead. So there are consequences to speaking out. And it's not just about being alienated, ostracized. People are fearful for their lives in certain cases, and these are regular jobs, or people are fearful for their livelihoods. And now let's talk about reason number three, which is, another reason why people stay in toxic work environments, especially when they have proximity to power. It's the perks, it's the access, it's the connections, it's the lifestyle. So if we talk about Diddy's chief of staff, who was named in the lawsuit, for those that don't know, a chief of staff is the right hand of the CEO. So that's the one who turns the vision into reality. They're not just in the room, they're making the room run. And so when you're that close to power, when your whole career has been built by proximity to someone at the top, it's not just hard to walk away, it can feel impossible. And when you're that close to power, the benefits are more than just a paycheck. I was telling you earlier that, even in the world of corporate, people can do backdoor reference checks. People can say, oh, I know this person and I like them or I didn't like them. And these are not necessarily the most powerful people in the room. But if that can happen at our levels in corporate, right? Or in a fast food restaurant or at a bank, it definitely can happen in Hollywood. And so all of these things can make someone less inclined to leave. So the next time you're tempted to ask, why didn't they just leave? Interrupt that thinking and ask instead, what kind of system made them feel like they couldn't, and who stood to benefit from their silence? And while you're at it, take a look at your own workplace, because we see this every day: subtle power plays, silent voices, consequences for speaking up. And that's why we have organizations like the US Department of Labor, OSHA, and somehow protecting employees nowadays is seen as woke. But that's a whole different podcast episode. But this is exactly why we constantly talk about employee rights on this channel, because it's not woke to say, hey, we should have sexual harassment training. It's not woke to say, hey, maybe we shouldn't discriminate against people, because all of those protections help to prevent a toxic work environment. And if it's not prevented, it makes the company have repercussions for creating a toxic work environment. Aren't you glad that these protections exist? Don't you want these agencies to exist so that you have these protections as a worker? And until we stop blaming individuals and start holding systems accountable, it won't just be a Hollywood story. It'll keep repeating in boardrooms, break rooms, and maybe your own 9 to 5. Anyway, as always, thank you for joining me down here in the basement. Stay sharp, stay safe. And remember, you're not stuck if you're in a toxic workplace. You're just gathering strength. I want you to have a great week, and I'll see you next time.